cut out the on-to part and just says Seattle.
He's a
He's
man.
hilarious.
Hey, Mike, he's a man of truncation. He is a man. He is very just getting more and more economical with his words. You got to
Oh
save those,
man!
you know.
Oh, by the way, welcome to President Trump's America.
Hey, listen,
Good
it
to be
is
with
what
you
it is,
guys.
man. I mean, if you're not down to embrace it, you can always leave. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I mean, there's options if you don't like it, right? Anybody.
I'm not going anywhere, man. I'm
Exactly.
staying here with you guys.
That's what I'm saying, and that was our message yesterday. Both sides, whoever wins. I mean, it's been a rough cycle, man, and nobody wants to get into this now. We're done with this, but it's been a tough cycle.
It's
It
brutal.
it really
It's
has
brutal.
been, and
Oh
let's
my
just
God.
forge forward. Let's forge forward together. See what happens, man.
Mike, you're around a lot of the athletes. A lot of athletes are obviously on the other side of this. What was your reaction, or what did you think their reaction was, or how they reacted to the presidential race? Because people paid attention in ways that I think a lot of people maybe hadn't in previous election cycles.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of the players that I spoke to, and I kind of did a story on this. It was like, I think locker rooms represented in some ways the country. There were people who felt very passionately on both sides. There wasn't a lot of middle, and it just seemed like from talking to guys that the conversations were just basically kind of kept off limits. Trump became very radioactive to some people, and Hillary Clinton became very radioactive to some players. So they just sort of stayed in their corners, and everyone kind of just wouldn't talk politics and just stayed away from it because they didn't want to get it too volatile. But in some locker rooms, I know that they did have conversations that were just fine. They were able to talk things out, and they were fine. It was kind of a couple different things, but I think Tiki would agree with this in that I think fans don't understand just how much players care about the exact same things that non-players do. They are very passionate about politics. They're very passionate about everything that we care about. We think that because they're athletes or because they're on a certain financial level that they don't care about the things that they do. They're very, very grounded, most players, very smart, very observant, and they followed this election the same way many of us did at least, very closely watched and had very strong opinions on it.
Yeah, there's been a level of engagement, whether it's the athletes. I mean, it's just social media certainly allows people to share their thoughts, and it's, I think as we move forward, in 4 years and 8 years, I just think there's a different energy and a different recognition and just a more of a voice for people to say what they think, and that's a good thing. So I wanted to get you on about the book, and it's listen, Mike, I don't know how old you are. Tiki and I mean, every story about Snake is hearsay. You hear about the carousing, and this to me is very for those even younger than us, and we're not even that young, but we didn't see him play, or at least in his prime. The thing that jumps out to me about Snake here, Kenny Stabler, and the name of the book is called Snake: Legendary Life of Ken Stabler by Mike Freeman, who's with us here on Tiki and Tierney. I mean, you see the photo of him shooting pool with a Marlboro hanging out of his mouth, and slinging back scotch, and it was such a different era. Clearly, a quarterback could not comport himself like that now. Give us a little bit of Snake away from the field, and then how that translated into the huddle when he actually took the Raiders to many high places. It's fascinating.
He was part of him was definitely a party guy, no question about it. But one of the things I do in the book, and what people really don't know, is that away from the field, two things. One, he was really genuinely adored by his teammates. They loved him. Mm-hmm. Because as you kind of point out, that era was it was a very different, incredibly violent era. And that forged a bond that I don't know if people can understand. It just playing that kind of football where there were the rules where you could basically kind of do whatever you wanted almost to guys, where quarterbacks and where receivers had to fight pretty much all the way down the field against defensive backs, where they had to do all these different things. It made guys a lot closer, and he represented to the Raiders. He was a tough guy. He would get picked up and slammed on his head. He would, we know he suffered a lot of concussions, and the players really respected his toughness. But away from the field, he would become a really great father, and his whole personality would change not long after he left the game, and he got very close to his $3. And one of them I talked to in the book, Kendra, very smart person, just like her dad. I mean, he became a completely different guy after he left the game than in the game. And also, one of the things that's kind of lost about him is he was a very, not just a smart guy, but for all the partying he did, when he was on the field, either the practice field or the playing field, he was all business, very calm, professional. There was no games when he was playing. It was all professional stuff. And then once the game ended, all bets were off. He would go out. He would go party. He'd meet with women. But when the games and when practices started, there was no more professional guys. So there were always these kind of 3-4 different stablers. But really the one that I was the most impressed with, that I write about a lot about, was when he left the game and what he became and the kind of father he became.
There you go. That's a good synopsis of the book. We're talking to Mike Freeman, Bleacher Report, and the name of the book is called Snake, Legendary Life of Ken Stabler. And Mike is with us here on Tiki and Tierney, CBS Sports Radio.
Now, Mike, Ken got in posthumously to the Hall of Fame, and this, I don't want to call it a controversy, but it's come up in the press over the last couple of days, the fact that he doesn't get the jacket and he doesn't get the ring. And when you go back and you look at the history of the Hall of Fame, there's a lot of guys who got in after they had passed away, and the Hall of Fame does not want to change or set a precedent about who wears the jacket or who has the jacket. They actually stated they don't want to set up a who gets it post, when the families, start fighting over these things, they don't want that to become part of the issue. Should this policy be changed? Should every family, and not just the individual who gets in the Hall of Fame, have access to the ring and the jacket?
Yeah, I think it should be changed. I didn't know really about I didn't know exactly what this policy was until this happened with Stabler, and his daughter, Kendra, who I mentioned, really sort of brought this issue up. And I think she's done a great service. I've really come to really respect her greatly, her toughness, the way she protects her dad and looks out for her dad. And I think what she did here was bring attention to something that should be changed. It's not, to me, this is a pretty simple fix. You just let the families, because they're the families, get those things. It's not, to me, all that complicated. And sometimes the Hall of Fame and sometimes the NFL, they just get sort of stuck in a rut, and they just say, this is the way it's always been done, this is how we're going to do it, and we're not going to change. Well, I mean, something like this you can change, and it's you could just get good PR out of it. You could do all these different, and they kind of just say no. And I don't think they make any good points. That's just me. And I think this would be very easy to do, not a big deal, and you would make the families happy. And this is an easy thing. So that's kind of how I look at it. It just doesn't make sense to be so concrete about it or something like this. Make the families happy. That's okay to do. You can do that. There's no issue with that. Go ahead, try it.
Yeah.
It'll work. I promise.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of look at it.
Mike, we don't have a lot of time on this, but I wanted to, for our entire audience, but specifically maybe a younger portion, you look at the meat of his career, and obviously it took him a long time to get in the Hall of Fame, and a lot of his prime years, I'm looking at this now, 16 touchdowns, 24 picks, 16 touchdowns, 30 picks, 13 touchdowns, 28 picks. He's got about 30 more picks than touchdowns in his career. Now, I know that numbers don't tell the whole story, but can you give a more modern comparison? Again, not a ton of time, but maybe somebody that's even playing now or recently retired that you think Ken Stabler mirrors, or the player now mirrors Ken Stabler?
Aaron Rodgers. Maybe a little, maybe a taller Russell Wilson, but I would say Aaron Rodgers.
So then why did it take him so long to get in the Hall of Fame?
Because a lot of the voters, some of whom I know and are really good at what they do, but a lot of it is about